Now we'll move on to the keynote talks. The first talk is by Dr. Chelsea Finn. Please welcome Professor Chelsea Finn. She's an assistant professor of computer science and electric engineering at Stanford University and the William George and Ida Mary Hoover Faculty Fellow, as well as the co-founder of Physical Intelligence Company. Professor Chelsea's pioneering research has advanced end-to-end learning for vision-based robotic manipulation, developed meta-learning algorithms for few-shot adaptation, and scaled robotic learning through large dataset. Her work recognized with Sloan Fellowship, IEEE-RS Early Academic Career Award, and the ACM Doctoral Dissertation Award. She earned her bachelor's in ECS from MIT and her PhD in computer science from UC Berkeley. So now I'll hand over to Dr. Chelsea Finn. Today's her talk would be on developing steerability and memory in vision language action models.
Thank you for the introduction. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. So I unfortunately couldn't make it to CVPR in person this year, but excited to share some of the work that we've done recently. There should also be time for questions at the end of the talk, if there are any. So to jump right in, I think we've seen this very successful paradigm for training large language model generalists. And I think that there remains this question of how to best develop models that can use other modalities that are kind of inspired by the success of general purpose models. And in particular, what I'd like to talk about today is how we might try to develop models that can accurately capture vision, language, and action, ultimately in order to control a robot to do a wide range of things. And I think that when we're thinking about trying to develop vision, language, action models, we need to think about various questions. One question is that we need to think about how we can leverage vision language models when then trying to adapt them to vision language action models, analogously to how vision language models might leverage language models as a starting point or initialization. And we'd like to be able to preserve the knowledge of the pre-training while actually training a vision language action model. And then another challenge that comes up is thinking about what sort of data we need to train these models. And concretely, when I say vision language action model, these are the kinds of tasks that I'm talking about. So for example, can we train a model that can control a robot to make a sandwich following a user prompt? Like a prompt like, can you make me a vegan sandwich? I don't like pickles though. So this is kind of not too dissimilar from language model training, where you can prompt them to do a variety of different things, but now we actually need to control a robot to do that. And in order to successfully complete this prompt, the robot needs to be able to interpret diverse and complex prompts to decide what steps to take next, and then also decide how to control the motors based on perception of its environment, of objects, and based off of what steps it decided to take. As another concrete task for these kinds of models, we also, another example is, can we, for example, put a robot in a home that it's never been in before and have it be able to do some useful cleaning tasks in that room? This is really challenging because there's new objects, new furniture, new lighting, new layout, and in order to succeed, the robot must interpret language commands, how they connect to the novel environment, decide how to act based off of how they're perceiving new cabinets, new furniture, new lighting, and so forth, and also generalize its physical actions to new physical attributes of objects, counter heights, furniture, and so forth. So essentially, to develop a good vision language action model, you need good generalization across language, across vision, and across action modalities all at the same time. So quite a challenging problem. Now, today I'd like to talk about a few of the challenges that come up specifically when trying to address these challenges, and also present some results from our efforts in developing generalizable vision language action models. So the first challenge is how to handle a variety of complex high-level prompts when data from robots may not actually be annotated with such prompts. The second is that if you try to naively approach developing a vision language action model, they can ignore certain modalities, like ignoring language instructions, and how can we address that challenge? And then the last challenge is that data is often very important, and how should we think about the data requirements for these kinds of models? Cool, so let's first talk about how to handle a variety of prompts. So typical approaches for training robots to follow language look something like this, where you'll collect some demonstrations on the robot, operating the robot to do some tasks, then segment and label those demonstrations with task instructions. So you might say that like one part of that demonstration, the robot is picking up the tomato. Another part of the demonstration, the robot is picking up a piece of lettuce and so forth. So this is kind of similar to how you would collect video data in computer vision, where you might record like egocentric video data from like Eco4D, for example, and then maybe annotate kind of different language segments of that video. And then what we'll do is we'll typically train a model conditioned on the current image and the language instruction, like pick up the tomato, and then predict what actions the robot should take. Now, unfortunately, if you do something like this, you can get a policy that can follow atomic commands like pick up the tomato, but not be able to follow a variety of high-level prompts like, can you make me a ham and cheese sandwich? And I don't like pickles. And we'd like to study how we might develop models that can handle more complex prompts. Like, can you make me a vegan sandwich? I don't like pickles. Please don't touch my phone. Can you get me a sweet snack that's not in the grocery basket? Or that's not trash. And handling more complex prompts, interjections, and situate corrections goes far beyond what kind of typical prior approaches are handling. And this is important because if a human is interacting with one of these models and one of these robots, then they won't know what kinds of commands the robot can follow. And ideally, we'd be able to respond to any command that a human might ask or might say. Cool. So how do we address this problem? So there's two challenges here. The first is that we need to be able to follow high-level commands, and the second is the open-endedness of these commands. But first, let's talk about how we might handle high-level commands like make a sandwich instead of something like pick up the tomato. To do this, we're going to use actually a hierarchical model. And in particular, we will have a high-level vision language model that's interpreting the prompt and then generating language commands and verbal responses. And these language commands, like pick up one slice of bread, will be passed to a low-level policy, which will be a vision language action model that will be producing motor commands that will aim to fulfill this kind of lower-level language command, or this atomic action. And with this framework, this is going to allow us to take as input a high-level prompt like make a sandwich, and then this high-level policy will break that down into smaller tasks, and those smaller tasks are provided to the low-level policy, which will be a VLA. Now, in principle, this is something that kind of breaks down a big task into smaller ones, but we need to think about how we would actually train this high-level policy in order to break up a task like make a sandwich into pick up a slice of tomato or pick up one slice of bread. Now, to do this, what we'll do is we'll use data that looks very similar to typical like video demonstration data. So we'll collect robot demonstrations for a task. For example, the task of making a sandwich. And the demonstrations might look like something like this, where first like the robot picks up the bread, puts the bread on the cutting board, puts some cheese on the bread, takes some roast beef and puts it on the cheese, adds some lettuce, and then completes the sandwich by putting another piece of bread on the sandwich. And then once we have these demonstrations, we're going to, again, segment and label different atomic instructions, similar to how you would train a kind of atomic instruction following policy. So this first part would be picking up one slice of bread. This part would be putting the bread on the cutting board. This part would be picking up a slice of cheese, and so forth. And this is the data that we'll use to train the low-level policy. We can also use this data to train the high-level policy. So if we know this is the task of making a sandwich, then we can train a high-level policy to predict these atomic instructions from the current image and from this string that's describing the high-level task. And so this will allow the robot to follow a much higher level prompt, like make a sandwich, versus only being able to follow kind of when we put these pieces together, we put the high level policy, which takes the task string and predicts the atomic commands, together with a low level policy that follows those atomic commands to output motor actions. That overarching system can follow much higher level prompts. Now, separate from handling high level prompts, there's this question of how do we handle open-ended language. So we could, for example, take that data and label it as like make a ham and cheese sandwich, make a vegan, or make a lettuce and cheese sandwich and so forth. But the annotating like all of the possible ways in which people might ask questions ends up getting pretty expensive. And we'd like some way to kind of avoid this step of collecting all sorts of like human-robot interactions or prompts that might correspond to different actions. And this is something that can be challenging to scale and cover all of the possible ways humans might prompt robots in the future. And so the idea we have here is that language models actually have a pretty good idea for some of the things that humans might ask. And so we can actually collect synthetic data. And in particular, we can use large language models to actually generate prompts that, that the human might ask. And in particular, we can actually ask it to generate prompts, not just in general, but also for the specific scenario that the robot is currently executing. And so what this looks like is we'll take our human annotated data that's saying like pick up the Kit Kat for this particular image. And then for this part of the video, we'll ask a vision language model, like what is an example prompt that might have led to this scenario? And it generates something like, hi robot, can you get me something chocolatey? And it also generates a response that the robot could say before then going and picking up the Kit Kat. And so this is a way to leverage language models essentially for like a form of data augmentation, essentially like a reverse prompt generation given some robot data. And then we can use this sort of generated prompts for these different scenarios. We can actually generate lots of different prompts that would have led to the robot picking up the Kit Kat, and then use these synthetic prompts in our high-level policy training to train the high-level policy, not just to be able to follow a single high-level task, but any of these different prompts or any of the interjections that a human might have asked in that particular scenario. Cool. So then putting the pieces together, we'll again still have this hierarchical structure, but this high-level vision language model is going to be trained with synthetic data in order to handle a variety of prompts. And then the low-level policy training is unchanged. We're simply training it to follow different atomic instructions. Okay, so we refer to this as like a hierarchical interactive robot system, or HiRobot for short. And in our experiments, we found that this allowed the robot to follow a variety of different prompts. So in this first example, we asked, hi robot, can you make me a ham and cheese sandwich? And we find that the robot is able to connect that high-level prompt to low-level actions and chooses to, for example, pick up a slice of cheese, put that on the bread, pick up a slice of ham, put that on the bread, and then complete the sandwich. Actually, sorry, in this case, the person also interjects and asks the robot to add more pickles. So it can also handle these kinds of interjections where it decides to add things for a user, and then the user, I guess in this case, it then just completes the sandwich after that. On the right example, we asked the robot a more complex query, which is, can you make me a vegan sandwich? I don't like pickles though. And we'll see that the robot decides to add lettuce and tomatoes to the sandwich and is able to connect the high-level prompt to intermediate actions to take and also execute those actions on the robot. And I should mention that actually, in some ways, this is kind of like a pick and place task on the robot, but actually manipulating these ingredients, especially the cheese and the tomatoes, involves some actually fairly like fine motor control to be successful. Okay, as another example, we collected a bunch of data of busing tables where you throw the trash away and you put the plates and bowls and other dishware into the bin. And if we don't condition the robot with any prompt, it just decides to follow what was in the data. We can also ask it, clean up only the trash, but not the dishes, and it can follow a prompt like that and change the task that it's doing to only clean up the trash. Here's an example of it responding to a situated correction. So in this task, it was picking up a Kit Kat, it put a Kit Kat in the basket, and then the person said, give me something sweet that's not in the basket. And then it is able to figure out that it can get some Skittles and put those Skittles in the basket. Cool, so those are some like kind of qualitative examples of what this model does. Now, quantitatively, we can also evaluate how well the system is able to handle a variety of prompts. We can also look at whether existing foundation models can out of the box do this kind of high-level reasoning for robotic situations. And what we find is that if you take the GPT-4o model and actually use it as a high-level policy with actually extensive prompt engineering, because we wanted to try to get this to work, it actually is not able to serve as an accurate high-level policy for helping the robot complete these tasks. Whereas our system is able to, by actually using these kinds of models, by using kind of state-of-the-art vision language models for data generation, for synthetic data generation for prompts, combined with robot data, we're able to get much higher performance on a variety of different prompts. And specifically what this is measuring is the instruction accuracy is measuring how often does a predicted command align with the given prompt. So this is just a measure of how good the high-level policy is. And then task progress is measuring how much of the intended task does the robot complete at the end of the day. We also find that a flat model that is only training a single policy without any hierarchy also struggles to accurately follow instructions and complete the task compared to using the full hierarchical system. But yeah, the big takeaway here is that like kind of frontier language models generally are struggling with visual understanding pertaining to the robot and don't serve as a good high-level policy for the robot. We also specifically tested like if we isolate how much does hierarchy help and we keep the synthetic data in versus how much does synthetic data help, but we use hierarchy, we see a large gap in both the high-level policy's accuracy in giving instructions and the total task progress, which is suggesting that like both of these are really helpful for following open-ended instructions and interjections. Cool, so some takeaways from this part. The key result is that we found that we can enable robots to respond to open-ended language interaction. This had two components. One was a hierarchy of vision language models that decouple the interpretation of prompts from low-level control, and synthetic data that generates a diversity of possible language interactions. There's also still a number of limitations here. So right now, the high-level policy currently lacks long context of past interactions, and we need to figure out how to adjust the way that we do synthetic data generation to create more complete traces of different scenarios, and think about how robots can complete very long horizon tasks. And then there's also some forms of language interaction that's not fully supported by the synthetic data. For example, there might be scenarios where the robot needs to ask a question, and we need to figure out how the synthetic data might kind of capture those kinds of interactions. And also think about how the robot should respond when it can't fulfill the request, such that the robot is aware of its limitations. Okay, so that was studying how these models can handle a variety of complex prompts. Now I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into some of the low-level choices in these VLA models. And the first is that if you kind of naively train a vision language action model, it can often ignore the language modality and only pay attention to the image modality. And as an example of this, here's a video from some of the early iteration when we were developing the Pi 05 model. And what we'll see here is at the beginning of the video, the robot was asked to pick up the cutting board. And instead of picking up the cutting board, it chose to pick up a plate and put that in the sink. And then again, it's going to be asked to pick up the cutting board. And instead of following the task of picking up the cutting board, it again decides to pick up a plate. And then eventually it does actually pick up the cutting board after the other objects are removed. And so while it sometimes follows language, it doesn't reliably follow language as much as we would hope. And so we'd like to think about whether we could improve its ability to follow language. And one idea here is that we know that vision language models react to prompts quite well. And so it seems like we're not preserving its ability to follow the language input. Now, to dive into why it might be ignoring the language modality, in this particular video, it was using something very similar to the Pi0 architecture. And so let's dive a little bit into that architecture. So what this architecture is doing is it takes a pre-trained vision language model, specifically the polygemma vision language model, and we pass as input between 1 and 3 images, depending on the robot hardware, as well as a language input. So this is kind of a typical input to a vision language model. And then we add a head to the model that's going to be predicting actions. This is actually going to be using diffusion. It's going to take the joint angles as input and predict about 50 time steps or about 1 second of future actions. And the reason that we're adding this is because actions are kind of a continuous modality. And diffusion is quite good at generating continuous vectors. And so we're going to kind of add this head to the model that's going to allow us to predict action chunks. And each of the parts of this transformer are going to attend to the internal values of the language model. But because typical vision language models don't have diffusion heads, this green part of the network is going to be randomly initialized, whereas the blue part of the network is going to be initialized with the polygemma model. And then we'll train this entire model on a diverse set of robot data. Now, the challenge here is that this action expert, because it's randomly initialized, it isn't necessarily good at preserving the vision language model knowledge. And so even if our original vision language model is very good at attending to language input, this part might not do a good job of preserving that capability. So in order to try to allow the robot to follow language better, perhaps what we could do is, instead of adding this action head, we could try to autoregressively predict tokenized actions. And then if we did this, then we could actually potentially better preserve vision language model because we won't have any randomly initialized parameters. Now there's some complexity in terms of how you would predict tokenized actions. And if you kind of naively bin actions, autoregressive prediction often leads to quite poor performance. We introduced some work that basically a new tokenizer for actions that's actually been used in some other domains, which is the basic idea is to convert the actions into the frequency space using a discrete cosine transform. And then kind of similar to how JPEG compression works, there's a lot of temporal correlations in the actions that we're predicting. So we could essentially use discrete cosine transform, which is used in JPEG, and then quantize that, and then predict these quantized actions. And we find that if we do this, and we are predicting these tokenized actions instead of using a diffusion head, we find that this leads to faster training. And most importantly, we find that this actually follows language much better. We find that it no longer ignores the language modality. Unfortunately, though, if we are predicting these actions autoregressively, inference can be very slow. And this can be a challenge in robotics applications where we actually are running this on a robot and we'd like it to be running in roughly real time. And so what we can do, and what we found to work quite well, is to actually pre-train with these tokenized actions and then post-train with a diffusion head. And so what pre-training looks like is we're going to take the polygemma vision language model, and we're not going to add any new randomly initialized parameters, and instead we're going to be predicting a variety of different prediction tasks, and this will include kind of predicting these tokenized actions, but it will also include other typical vision language model tasks like captioning and bounding box prediction, as well as different language subtasks like what the high-level policy typically does, like put the plate in the sink. And then after this pre-training stage, which will be kind of preserving all of the knowledge that the vision language model has by not introducing randomly initialized parameters, we'll then add the action expert or action head at that point with diffusion, and the model then will be fine-tuned for a much smaller amount of time on the robot data. And we find that if we do this sort of diffusion training during, like in the initial robot training stage, this doesn't perform nearly as well. And so when we do this sort of like pre-training and post-training where we only introduce diffusion during post-training, it trains about 4 to 5 times faster, and it follows language often like far, far better. So it might follow it like 80% of the time rather than 20% of the time. Cool. And then beyond language instructions, it's also really important to think about what sort of data we need to support these kinds of models. It's always challenging to quantify and kind of concretely talk about like specific data collection procedures, but we collect diverse robot data of operating robots in many different homes. So we collected data in a variety of homes across San Francisco. We also set up some mock kitchens and mock bedrooms. And the result of it was a data set that had robots completing cleaning tasks in more than 100 unique rooms. And then the full data mixture for training this vision language action model looks something like this. So we include the diverse mobile manipulator data, which includes predicting low-level actions and predicting high-level kind of commands to do, like those atomic language commands that the robot should complete to do the full task. But we also include diverse static manipulation data. So this is data that's not from a mobile robot, but just arms mounted on tables, as well as data from lab environments and data from the web. So this includes like captioning data, bounding box prediction, and so forth. Notably, we find that, or in our data mixture, this diverse mobile manipulation data only accounts for about 2% of the overall data mixture. But this is going to be where we're going to be primarily evaluating the robot, because we want a robot that can not just manipulate objects from a static position, but also drive around a room and complete a longer task. Okay, cool. So how well does this work? So we tested this vision language action model in, we like rented new homes and tested them and basically brought the robot there. We'd never collected any data in those environments, and we asked it to complete a variety of different tasks. So here I asked it to close the cabinet. Then I asked it to put the dishes in the sink. And because the robot has never seen these objects or this environment before, it has to generalize to the height of the counter, to the lighting conditions, to the layout of the room, to the kind of physical attributes of the object. And lastly, I ask it to clean up the spill here, and it uses the sponge to wipe the spill on the counter. So it's able to kind of generalize across the visual perception that it sees, the language commands that it's receiving, and also control the robot to complete that as well. And then we tested in other homes as well. Laura here asked it to clean the bedroom, so it actually just does a full, like, very high level command, and it puts away the clothes in the hamper. It throws away some trash, and then here it's going to make the bed. And then later in the video, there's kind of other examples of different homes that we brought it to that, again, where it had never seen data from these homes, and it's able to complete these tasks. A few more examples of how well it works, or kind of scenarios where it's able to handle different introductions. So here I add some more spill and is able to react in real time to the new spill that's on the counter. On the right, Laura throws different clothing items on the floor. She's also later in the video going to kind of swap out the laundry bin as kind of to show the kind of variety in objects that it can handle. On the left, Lucy's messing with the robot to see the kinds of variation that it can handle. Juan also messes with it there. And then on the right, Suraj messes with the robot in terms of like where the objects are located, and it's able to react to those perturbations as well. Cool. So quantitatively, let's actually look at the different design choices that I talked about. So first, if we remove hierarchy, this is kind of comparing yellow to white. We see that hierarchy continues to be important for long horizon tasks, especially for this dishes and sink task. And then if we compare pre-training with diffusion, which is shown in green, to pre-training with tokenized actions, we find that using the tokenization is far better across a variety of different tasks. And then lastly, we looked at the data mixture, and we found that if we exclude web data, at least on most of the tasks that we were looking at, this wasn't a huge problem. But if we exclude static robot data from the lab, static robot data from diverse environments, or both static robot data, we see a significant drop in performance compared to if we include that static robot data in the mixture. And then lastly, we looked at like how do we, if we have data from fewer environments, what does performance look like? And this x-axis is showing the performance as we increase the number of environments in the data, whereas the green is showing what is Oracle performance if you collect data in the target room. And we see that as you get to closer to 100 rooms, that in the training data, you're able to match the performance of using in-domain data. Cool. And then there's also a couple failure modes. So if you, for example, ask the robot to, this case is putting an item in a drawer, it doesn't fully put the item in the drawer and decides it's done. Here we asked it to put some clothes in the laundry basket, and it actually drove over the shirt and gets stuck, and it isn't able to recover. On the bottom left, we asked it to place the dishes in the sink, and for the cutting board, it's really challenging to grasp it, and in this particular case, it fails to grasp the cutting board after putting the other items in. And in the last example, I think that we asked it to put the spatula in the drawer, and it picks up the spatula, and it decides that instead of putting it in the drawer, it wants to put it in the oven, and it tries to open the oven and tries to put it in there. Cool. And there's other challenges too with regard to speed of these policies, really long horizon planning, partial observability as well. Lots of future work to do. But kind of the main takeaways I'd like to convey is that we found that pre-training with tokenized actions is far better than pre-training these models with diffusion. We find that increasing diverse data allows robots to generalize to completely new environments, and diverse data on static robots can actually improve performance on mobile robots. And there's lots more in the paper as well. Cool. That's it. I'd like to thank and acknowledge all the folks who worked on some of the stuff that I presented, especially Lucy, who led the HiRobot work, and the whole Pi team who worked on the Pi 05 model. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Chelfin, for the very incredible talk. We'll take a few questions from the audience.
Is this on?
Yes.
I can't quite hear the question if something is being asked.
So you can't hear the question at all?
No, I heard the "is this on," but I didn't hear anything after that.
Okay, maybe I just need to be closer.
Oh, I can hear that now, yeah.
Awesome. So it seemed like the human baseline was around the like 80s. And I'm curious whether you think it is a bottleneck that humans have to demonstrate in the form factor of the robot, and whether you're going to saturate human performance in those demonstrations.
And you're talking about the human performance for like the high-level policy.
Yeah, in the end of the challenge number 1 section, there's a
Yeah. So so I guess there's a couple of things here. I can maybe go back to that slide. So the maybe it's actually right before this. Yeah, so in this case, the kind of using an expert high level doesn't like achieve full task success. And the reason for this is that the low level policy is doesn't always follow and successfully complete what the high level policy does. And so this is just a gap in how good the low level motor control is. Because we're only using a human for the high level policy. And so there's generally, I think, like lots of work to do to improve low level motor control of these policies and then get them to like closer to 99% success rate. Yeah, that's I think the main thought there. There's also some scenarios where humans don't necessarily do a good job of knowing how to command the kind of the specific instructions that the robot knows how to follow. But far and away, the biggest thing here is just the low level policy isn't perfect. And there's lots of work to do there.
Thank you.
Thank you. So